Far inside a limestone cave in the low hills of southern China, fragments of something fragile rest beneath layers of soil. They are not stone, not bone, not shell. They are pottery, small, curved pieces, darkened by fire, hardened by time. Archaeologists working in Xianrendong Cave in Jiangxi province identify these shards as the earliest known pottery in the world, dated to about 20,000 years ago. The discovery pushes human history into new territory. At that moment in time, the world is locked in the grip of the last glacial maximum. Ice sheets cover much of northern Europe and North America. In Asia, climates are cold and unstable. Forests retreat, grasslands stretch wide, rivers cut through chilled valleys, swollen with meltwater during warmer pulses, then frozen hard again. Humans living in these environments survive by flexibility and innovation. Pottery belongs to that story of adaptation. The shards at Xianrendong are not decorative luxuries, they are practical. Their surfaces carry traces of soot. Their edges sometimes show uneven thickness. They were handmade, pressed together from clay, then dried and fired close to the hearth. Some vessels were round-bottomed, others had shallow sides. They broke easily. But even so, people continued to make them, suggesting usefulness outweighed fragility. For scientists, this evidence reshapes timelines once thought fixed. Pottery had long been linked with agriculture and settled villages, yet here it appears thousands of years earlier, among hunter-gatherers still moving across landscapes. The dating is precise. Radiocarbon measurements from layers above and below, combined with analysis of charred material, consistently point to around 20 millennia before the present. This is older than the earliest pottery of Japan's Jomon tradition by several thousand years. It is far older than the first farming communities of the Middle East. The Xianrendong fragments show that the relationship between pottery and farming is not simple cause and effect. Instead, pottery begins in the context of cold climates, where cooking starchy roots and storing food offer survival advantages. In the stillness of the cave, one can imagine how it worked. Clay gathered from riverbanks, kneaded with water, shaped by hand, perhaps cord or woven matting pressed into the surface to help grip the vessel or prevent cracks, leaving behind faint impressions still visible today. The clay vessel, then set near the hearth, exposed to uneven heat, hardening slowly. Sometimes it cracked, sometimes it held together long enough to cook a meal. Fire blackened the outside, food boiled inside. These steps created something entirely new, a container stronger than bark, more fireproof than baskets, able to withstand heat better than animal hides. Archaeological layers at Xianrendong reveal not only pottery, but also stone tools, animal bones, and charred plant remains. Together, they show that hunter-gatherers used diverse resources. With pots, they could process acorns, tubers, and wild rice more efficiently. Acorns in particular, abundant yet bitter, needed leaching and cooking to be edible. Boiling them in clay made the process easier, releasing starch, reducing toxins, improving digestibility. A vessel filled with water and nuts placed on embers could provide nourishment through long winters. A lesser-known detail lies in the distribution of these early fragments. They were not scattered randomly. Many lay in clusters, near hearth features, suggesting intentional placement and repeated use. Some fragments also show signs of repair, resin or rejoining efforts, implying people valued the vessels and tried to extend their life. The making of pottery was not casual experimentation, it was a habit. passed on, maintained, perhaps even taught across generations. Yet much remains mysterious. Why here? And why then? Pottery appears in southern China earlier than almost anywhere else, long before agriculture and sedentary villages emerge. Some researchers propose that harsh climatic conditions forced people to experiment with new cooking techniques. Others suggest cultural creativity flourished in certain groups regardless of external pressure. There is no single answer. The evidence is fragmentary, the reasons debated. The absence of comparable finds in other nearby regions raises questions. Was this invention isolated, or did it spread from one group to another, leaving only faint traces? On the planetary scale, the timing is striking. Around 20,000 years ago, sea levels were more than 100 meters lower than today. Vast continental shelves lay exposed, turning coastlines into wide plains. Cold winds shaped steppe environments, while glaciers reflected sunlight, cooling the planet further. Human populations were scattered and relatively small. Yet across continents they were already experimenting with technology that would transform daily life. Pottery is just one sign of a global pattern: innovation under pressure, creativity in the face of extreme environments. The Xianrendong cave itself adds to the sense of continuity. Its chambers preserve not only pottery, but also evidence of repeated occupation over tens of thousands of years. Humans sheltered there from storms, cooked meals, left behind debris. The walls are silent, yet the soil layers act like memory. Excavations reveal hearth after hearth, each with its own ash and charcoal, each sealing fragments of life lived long ago. Among them, the pottery shards stand out as markers of a turning point. For those who study deep time, such discoveries are not simply curiosities. They redraw maps of technological development. They challenge older assumptions that tied pottery strictly to agriculture. They show that mobile hunter-gatherers, faced with Ice Age extremes, could invent complex solutions long before domestication of plants or animals. In this sense, pottery embodies resilience. It also foreshadows changes to come when clay vessels become central to storage, surplus, and the beginnings of settled life. Step by step, archaeologists piece together the story. A rim here, a base there, a handful of decorated fragments. Each small discovery expands understanding. Some shards even retain microscopic residues of food, allowing chemical analysis. These tests confirm that starchy plants were cooked inside, linking the vessels directly to subsistence strategies. Through such detail, ancient meals come faintly into focus. The cave's pottery has also encouraged comparisons with sites farther north and east. In Siberia's Amur region and in Japan, pottery appears not much later, suggesting either independent invention or cultural transmission across wide distances. This broader pattern points to a time when humans, scattered yet connected by migration routes, were converging on similar solutions to common challenges. Clay and fire were everywhere, but the idea of combining them to form vessels emerged only in particular contexts. The mystery of why remains unsolved. Even in fragments, the pottery of Xianrendong speaks of endurance. It survived 20 millennia underground. It survived shifting climates, river floods, and countless cycles of erosion. Now it survives again, in laboratories and museums, studied under microscopes, dated with precision, yet still holding secrets. The people who made it are gone, their voices unknown, but their innovation remains tangible. In this quiet beginning, pottery enters human history. Born from clay, hardened by fire, carried forward by need. It stands as one of the earliest steps toward the technologies that would later define civilization. It is fragile, yet lasting. It is simple, yet revolutionary. In the cave's darkness, fragments lie still, but they hold within them the light of invention at a time when survival itself was uncertain. The world 20,000 years ago is harsh, and in East Asia its people live within landscapes defined by cold winds, shifting rivers, and fragile resources. This period is known to science as the last glacial maximum. Ice sheets press far south across Eurasia and North America, locking water into frozen walls of ice. In northern China and Mongolia, steppe grasses dominate while forests shrink. In southern regions, winters remain cold and summers short. Rainfall patterns change and food is scarce. For humans scattered through these regions, daily survival depends on constant adaptation. Hunters move with herds of red deer and wild boar, tracking migrations across valleys. Gatherers collect acorns, chestnuts, tubers, and wild rice along river margins. Fish and shellfish are taken where streams and lakes allow. Every season brings new uncertainty. The balance between hunger and nourishment is thin. Archaeological evidence from caves such as Shanrendong reveals hearths filled with ash, animal bones split for marrow, stone tools worn from heavy use. This material record shows communities living at the edge of abundance and scarcity. Fire is their anchor, offering heat, light, and protection. Around its glow, food is cooked, tools are made, stories perhaps spoken. In such conditions, any innovation that stretches food or makes it more digestible holds extraordinary value. The climate itself shapes human choices. During the coldest phases, thick snow lingers, rivers freeze, and mobility is reduced. In warmer pulses, vegetation expands, and game becomes easier to follow. These fluctuations encourage flexible strategies, small groups splitting and merging, moving between caves, rock shelters, and open camps. Yet even mobility has limits. When resources thin, hunger forces experimentation. Pottery emerges within this landscape not as ornament, but as necessity. A lesser-known detail lies in the dietary remains from southern China. Charred plant residues include not only acorns but also beans, gourds, and grasses. Many of these require long cooking to become edible. Without containers that tolerate fire, such foods are difficult to use. By creating pottery, communities unlock calories once inaccessible. The innovation is directly tied to survival under Ice Age stress. Still, mysteries endure. Why did pottery not appear earlier, given that clay and fire were long familiar to humans? And why here, in a relatively marginal environment, rather than in more temperate regions with richer resources? Scholars debate these questions. Some argue that scarcity drives invention. Only under severe pressure do people take risks with new technologies. Others suggest that cultural choices, rituals, traditions, even chants, play roles as large as environment. No single explanation satisfies all evidence.
On a planetary scale, the last glacial maximum alters every continent. Ocean levels drop more than 100 meters, exposing wide coastal plains. Winds sweep low-S dust across northern China, depositing layers that still shape soils today. Deserts expand in Central Asia. Tropical forests contract, replaced by drier woodlands. Human populations everywhere are small, scattered, often isolated. Yet within these isolated groups, ingenuity arises.
Pottery is one expression of this global pattern of resilience. In East Asia, the contrast between north and south is striking. To the north, hunters on open plains follow mammoth and horse, surviving with stone-tipped spears. To the south, groups in caves and river valleys rely on mixed diets, rich in plants but difficult to process. Pottery appears in the south first, reflecting these dietary needs. Cooking starchy roots or acorns requires sustained boiling, something impossible with simple fire pits. Clay vessels provide the missing tool. Archaeologists note another subtle clue. Many early pottery shards from Xianrendong show soot not only on the base, but also on sides, indicating they were placed directly into fires or embers, not suspended above. This suggests methods of cooking adapted to fragile containers, shallow fires, careful placement, constant tending. Such techniques must have been learned through trial and error. Some pots cracked, others survived, and knowledge accumulated across generations. Communities at this time likely numbered only a few dozen individuals. Within them, cooperation was essential. Pottery making may have been a shared task, gathering clay from riverbanks, carrying it back, shaping vessels, firing them near hearths. The process linked people to landscape in new ways. Clay sources became part of seasonal movement patterns. Fire not only warmed but transformed material. The invention, fragile yet persistent, reflected both environmental constraint and cultural creativity. The archaeological record also suggests continuity. Pottery fragments are found in successive layers, spanning centuries. This means the practice was not a single experiment but a tradition, maintained despite hardships. Through ice, flood, and shifting vegetation, groups continued to make vessels. That persistence signals more than practical benefit. It hints at cultural embedding, where knowledge becomes part of identity. Yet mysteries deepen when comparisons are drawn. In Europe and the Near East, at the same time, people endured equal or harsher climates, yet no pottery appears until much later. Instead, they relied on stone, bone, and hide technologies. Why the difference? Some researchers propose that ecological diversity in East Asia, with abundant plants requiring cooking, drove earlier adoption. Others note that traditions vary, and invention is never uniform. These unresolved debates remind us that human history is patchwork, not linear. From the perspective of global climate, these early potters are small figures on a vast stage. Glaciers advance and retreat, sea levels shift, ecosystems change. Across continents, humans invent new tools, bone needles for sewing, microliths for hunting, pigments for art. Pottery joins this suite of Ice Age innovations. Though born in one corner of East Asia, its significance extends worldwide, for it begins a trajectory that will culminate in agriculture, storage, and settlement. Step by step, archaeologists reconstruct this world. Sediment cores reveal pollen grains showing vegetation changes. Isotopic analysis of animal bones indicates seasonal hunting patterns. Charcoal fragments map fire use. Against this backdrop, pottery shards stand out as both humble and transformative. They remind us that even in times of scarcity, humans created solutions that endured. The last glacial maximum eventually passes, though slowly. Ice retreats, forests spread, rivers swell. Pottery, however, remains. From its fragile beginnings in caves like Xianrendong, it will spread and diversify, taking many forms. But in this section of time, in this cold and hungry world, it is still new, still uncertain. still a fragile tool for fragile lives. The glow of fire has always drawn humans close. In the long nights of the Ice Age, fire provides light, warmth, and safety against predators. Within the limestone chambers of Xianrendong and other caves in southern China, hearths mark the very center of daily life. Their blackened soils and layers of ash remain visible to archaeologists today. Silent traces of countless nights when people gathered together. In this setting, the first fragile pottery vessels were formed and hardened. The hearth was more than a place of warmth. It was a workshop, a kitchen, and a gathering space. Around its edge, people sat, repaired tools, cooked meals, and cared for children. The controlled heat of the fire was essential not only for survival, but also for experimentation. To harden clay into vessels, steady heat was required. Without the hearth, pottery could not exist. The process likely began by accident. Clay left too close to flames might harden unexpectedly. Someone may have noticed that the material, once brittle, became stronger after contact with fire. This observation, repeated and remembered, set the stage for intentional shaping. Slowly, through trial and error, clay was molded into forms designed to withstand the heat of the hearth. Archaeological remains at Xianrendong confirm this connection. Pottery shards are found directly within hearth deposits, mingled with charcoal and bone fragments. Some pieces are blackened on the outside, suggesting vessels were set directly into embers. Others show irregular coloration, the result of uneven heating in open fires. These details reveal the conditions under which pottery was first fired, not in kilns or controlled ovens, but in simple hearths glowing in cave darkness. The fire itself was never constant. During cold winters, it had to be fed continuously with branches, grasses, and dried animal dung. Flames leapt high, then sank to embers. People learned to use the shifting temperatures, placing clay close to embers for gradual heating, then pulling it aside when flames threatened to crack the vessel. Managing this balance required care. The fragility of early pottery reflects the difficulty of this task. Many vessels broke in firing, but enough survived to show the method worked. The hearth also shaped the design of early vessels. Round-bottomed pots were easier to nestle among coals. Shallow bowls allowed quick heating. Thick walls resisted cracking but required more clay, while thinner walls cooked faster but broke easily. Each design was a compromise between material limits and culinary needs. The archaeological record shows this experimentation. Fragments vary in thickness, curvature, and surface treatment, each reflecting small adjustments. A lesser-known detail emerges from microscopic study of ash layers. Some fragments of fired clay are intermixed with plant fibers reduced to ghostly impressions. This suggests that baskets or mats may have been used alongside hearths, sometimes burned accidentally, leaving marks on clay. The intermingling of technologies, woven plant containers and clay vessels, shows that innovation did not replace older methods but supplemented them. Pottery and basketry coexisted, each serving unique functions around the fire. The hearth also left residues that archaeologists can now analyze. Chemical tests detect starch grains from plants such as acorns and wild rice, confirming that vessels were used for cooking. Charred crusts cling to inner surfaces, preserved for millennia. These crusts reveal that fire and clay combined to unlock new diets. Foods once inedible or bitter could now be softened and transformed. In this way, the hearth became a laboratory of survival, where cooking techniques reshaped human nutrition. Yet mysteries remain. Did these hearths serve purely domestic purposes, or did they also carry symbolic or communal meaning? Fire often holds dual roles, practical and ritual. While the evidence from Shanrendong emphasizes cooking, the possibility of shared ceremonies cannot be dismissed. Archaeologists tread carefully here, noting that while fire's warmth was universal, its meanings may have extended beyond simple subsistence. The absence of direct proof leaves the question open. On a planetary scale, fire at this time holds profound significance. Across continents, from Africa to Europe to Asia, every human group depends on hearths. The last glacial maximum amplifies this dependence. Without fire, survival in cold latitudes would be impossible. The mastery of controlled flames unites distant peoples in a shared reliance. Within this global context, the innovation of pottery emerges naturally from the intimate relationship between fire and daily life. The hearth also connects time. Ash layers build up year after year, preserving evidence of repeated occupations. Archaeologists peel back these layers like pages in a book. In one layer, stone tools dominate. In another, pottery fragments appear. The transition is subtle but meaningful. It shows that the innovation of pottery did not appear in isolation, but as part of the ongoing rhythm of firelit life. Communities gathered at these fires were small, perhaps 20 to 40 individuals. Around the glow, tasks were divided. Some tended flames, others prepared food, others shaped clay. Children watched and learned. Knowledge passed from one generation to the next in the flickering light of the hearth. The invention of pottery was thus not the act of one person, but the gradual accumulation of shared memory. The fragility of early vessels also influenced behavior. When a pot cracked, shards remained near the hearth, trampled into soil, buried in ash. These fragments are what survive to modern excavation. Their presence in abundance suggests frequent breakage, but also repeated replacement. People did not abandon the experiment when vessels failed. They persisted, learning from each break, refining their craft. Persistence itself becomes a marker of cultural resilience. Comparisons with other regions deepen the perspective. In Europe, at the same time, hearths also glowed in caves, but no pottery was made. Fires warmed and cooked, yet containers remained of hide, wood, or stone. The difference emphasizes that the link between fire and pottery was not inevitable. It required specific conditions, dietary needs, available clays, social choices that converged in East Asia. This unresolved question, why here, why then, remains at the heart of archaeological debate. In reflecting on the role of hearth, one can sense the scale of transformation. Fire, already central for hundreds of thousands of years, now catalyzed a new technology. Pottery, fragile and crude though it was, extended the functions of fire beyond warmth and cooking meat. It created the possibility of boiling, storing, and experimenting with foods in ways previously unknown. This quiet extension altered human potential. Step by step, archaeologists reconstruct this process. A hearth outline of charcoal and ash is measured, a fragment of pottery rim is catalogued, a residue sample is tested under microscope. Each detail adds to the picture of hearths as crucibles of innovation. The evidence speaks slowly, but firmly. Pottery was born in the glow of Ice Age. Fire. Even now, when we picture those early nights, the image is steady. Flames flicker against limestone walls. Smoke drifts upward. Around the hearth, figures cluster. tending clay vessels, stirring food, repairing tools. Outside, the cold presses close, but within the cave, light and warmth prevail. It is here, in these circles of firelight, that human ingenuity reshapes Earth into vessel and survival into continuity. Clay, at first glance, is ordinary. It lies in soft banks along rivers, in patches where streams deposit fine sediments, in beds exposed when water recedes. To Ice Age humans, this material would not have seemed remarkable. It was sticky when wet, brittle when dry, and heavy to carry. Yet in the river valleys of southern China, around 20,000 years ago, clay became the substance of a quiet transformation. The people living near caves such as Xianrendong moved through landscapes shaped by water. Streams carved channels through loess soils. Seasonal floods deposited silt. Pools formed in depressions after rains. In such places, clay gathered naturally. Its smooth texture and plasticity made it distinct from sand or gravel. Archaeologists today can identify the very outcrops from which ancient potters likely collected their raw material. Chemical signatures in pottery shards often match local clay sources, tying artifact to landscape with precision. Gathering clay required observation. In winter, frozen ground made collection difficult. In summer, swollen rivers carried silt away. The best times were often transitional, when water levels dropped just enough to reveal banks of fine, workable earth. People probably tested different patches, learning by touch which deposits cracked, which held together. The knowledge passed on through repeated practice, across years of trial and error. Clay itself had long been known. Humans and earlier hominins had used lumps of it for daub, pigments, even figurines. The famous clay figurines of Dolny Vestonis in Central Europe, dated to about 26,000 years ago, show that shaping and firing clay was already within human capacity. But in East Asia, people took a different step. They formed clay not into images of animals or humans, but into hollow vessels. The difference is subtle yet profound. Figurines expressed meaning. Vessels carried meals. The preparation of clay was as important as its collection. Raw clay contains grit, roots, and impurities. Ancient potters likely removed coarse elements, kneaded the material with water, and sometimes tempered it with sand or crushed stone to prevent cracking. Such practices are visible under microscopes today. Thin sections of pottery reveal inclusions deliberately added. This knowledge was not accidental. It represents careful experimentation, refined until workable recipes emerged. Once prepared, the clay could be shaped. Without wheels or molds, shaping relied on hands. Some vessels were formed by pressing clay slabs together, smoothing seams with fingers. Others may have been coiled, with strips of clay layered and joined. Marks left on surviving fragments, finger impressions, smoothing traces, record this intimate process. Each vessel bore the imprint of the maker's hands, literal and visible thousands of years later. The firing stage was most precarious. Clay that dried unevenly could crack. Clay heated too quickly could explode. To avoid this, vessels were dried near fires before being placed in shallow hearths. Flames licked the surfaces, hardening them unevenly. Many pieces broke, but those that survived gained strength enough to hold water and endure heat. Early potters must have watched closely, adjusting placement, shielding vessels with ash, experimenting with temperatures. The process demanded patience and attention, qualities woven into survival itself. A lesser-known detail from Xianrendong is the presence of cord marks on some pottery. Twisted fibers pressed against damp clay left patterns that hardened during firing. These may have served practical purposes, reducing slippage or reinforcing thin walls. They also hint at the parallel use of plant fibers, perhaps for baskets or nets. The overlap of technologies suggests a broader toolkit, clay vessels supplementing woven containers, each suited to different tasks. Mysteries remain about the exact uses of these early pots. Residue analysis reveals traces of starchy plants, but whether vessels also stored water, held cooked stews, or fermented beverages is uncertain. Some archaeologists propose that pots were multifunctional, used as much for storage as for cooking. Others argue that fragility limited transport, making them primarily cooking devices left at camp. The absence of complete vessels makes conclusions tentative. What survives are fragments, silent yet evocative. On a planetary scale, the making of clay vessels connects humans to rivers in new ways. Water had always been central, drinking, fishing, migration routes, but now rivers supplied material for technology. This link between water and clay would persist through history, from the floodplains of Mesopotamia to the valleys of the Yellow River. At Xianrendong, the relationship begins humbly, with handfuls of earth pressed into form. Collecting clay also implies planning. Unlike hunting, which provides immediate returns, pottery requires foresight. Clay must be gathered, shaped, dried, fired, then finally used. The investment of time and labor pays off later, in meals made more digestible, in food preserved longer. Such planning reflects cognitive and social depth. Groups that committed to pottery were choosing a delayed reward strategy, an approach that hints at broader cultural complexity. Archaeologists sometimes debate whether such innovations emerge from individual genius or collective tradition. In the case of pottery, evidence points toward community. The repeated discovery of similar vessels across generations suggests shared practice rather than isolated invention. Knowledge of clay properties, tempering, and firing spread within groups, becoming part of cultural memory. Even when vessels broke easily, people remade them, indicating persistence rooted in habit and trust. One striking observation is how quickly pottery reappears in distant regions. Within a few millennia of Xianrendong, sites in Japan and Siberia yield their own early vessels. Whether these represent independent discoveries or diffusion remains unresolved. The simplicity of gathering clay from rivers makes independent invention plausible. Yet similarities in techniques raise the possibility of shared knowledge carried along migration routes. The truth may lie between, with local adaptations emerging from common principles. In reflecting on these beginnings, one must consider scale. 20,000 years ago, global populations were small, numbering perhaps a few million across all continents. Yet within this small population, humans engaged in behaviors that foreshadowed civilizations to come. Clay gathering, shaping, and firing mark a subtle but significant threshold, the harnessing of Earth itself to extend survival. In this sense, pottery belongs not only to local caves but to the global arc of human ingenuity. Even today, archaeologists sifting through soil feel the continuity. A small rim fragment, blackened by fire, still fits into a fingertip. It testifies that someone, long ago, knelt by a riverbank, scooped clay, carried it back, and shaped it into something that had never existed before. The gesture was ordinary, yet its legacy endures across millennia. Clay gathered from riverbanks is thus more than raw material. It is evidence of foresight, patience, and the capacity to transform environment into tool. From this quiet act begins a trajectory that will shape storage, trade, and cuisine across the world. The rivers that once nourished Ice Age hunters also supplied the earth that would hold their meals, linking human survival to landscapes in ways both practical and profound. Cooking has always been more than sustenance. It is transformation. For Ice Age humans, the appearance of pottery brought this transformation into new realms. Before clay vessels, roasting on embers or stone boiling were the only ways to prepare many foods. Meat could be skewered on sticks, roots laid in coals, or water boiled by dropping heated stones into wooden containers. Each method worked, but all carried limits. Pottery shifted those limits. Now, wild roots, hard grains, and bitter nuts could be cooked slowly, softened through hours of steady heating. This change, small in appearance, altered the very fabric of survival. Among the most telling foods were acorns. Across East Asia's forests, oak trees dropped their nuts in abundance. Yet raw acorns are bitter and sometimes toxic, containing tannins that must be leached out. With only fire and stone, this process was laborious. But with a clay pot, acorns could be boiled repeatedly. The water changed, the bitterness reduced. What once was marginal food became staple. Pottery thus turned landscape into larder, unlocking calories that had been waiting for centuries. Grains tell a similar story. Archaeological residues inside pottery from Xianrendong reveal starch granules from wild rice. These grains, gathered from river margins, are small and uneven, but rich in energy. Roasting them directly would waste much. Boiling in pots softened husks, released starch, and created porridge-like meals. Such foods provided steady energy, especially vital during winters when game was scarce. Cooking grains was not merely convenience, it was resilience in action. Tubers also benefited. Plants like yams and lilies store starch underground, but many require long cooking to neutralize toxins. Pottery provided a vessel where these roots could be boiled until safe. The nutritional spectrum widened. What had once been edible only in emergencies became part of regular diets. Over generations, this shift reshaped foraging strategies. Groups could exploit broader environments, gathering plants others might ignore, confident that fire and clay together would make them safe. The change extended beyond plants. Animal bones, cracked for marrow, could now be boiled to release fats and proteins into broths. These soups, rich in nutrients, left traces as charred crusts on vessel walls. For archaeologists, such residues are treasure, microscopic signatures of ancient meals. They reveal that pottery was not an occasional novelty but a central tool in daily cooking. A lesser-known detail emerges from studies of lipid residues in early pottery. Even the oldest fragments sometimes carry molecular traces of animal fats, suggesting stews that combined meat with plants. Such mixed meals are invisible in bone or plant remains alone, but appear clearly when residues are analyzed. This evidence shows that pottery supported dietary integration, blending ingredients into new combinations. Meals became more varied, palates more diverse, bodies more nourished. Yet, mysteries remain. Did early cooks recognize the nutritional advantages of boiling, or did benefits emerge gradually, unnoticed at first? Archaeologists cannot answer. What is clear is that those who used pottery lived long enough and healthily enough to pass the habit on. Over centuries, Communities that embraced boiling gained resilience, and the tradition persisted. The broken shards left behind are quiet markers of this advantage. On the planetary scale, cooking with pottery marks a profound step. Fire had long transformed food, but now heat could be applied gently, evenly, and over time. This allowed humans to extract more energy from the same landscapes. In a world of scarce resources, and such efficiency mattered, populations remained small, but their capacity to endure expanded. The slow simmering of food in clay vessels echoes across continents, foreshadowing future revolutions in diet. The hearths of Xianrendong offer glimpses of this process. Pottery fragments lie beside cracked acorn shells, charred tubers, and animal bones. Together they tell the story of meals prepared carefully, slowly, with patience. The pots themselves are crude by later standards, uneven rims, thick walls, fragile bases, yet they worked. Water simmered, roots softened, grains swelled. Each vessel, however imperfect, was a bridge between raw landscape and nourishing meal. Communities must have noticed the difference. Children thrived with softer foods. Elders, whose teeth were worn, could eat porridges and soups. The sick recovered more easily when given broths. Pottery thus extended care as well as nutrition. Meals prepared in clay carried not only calories, but also comfort. Around fires, bowls were passed, food shared. Survival became a communal act, supported by vessels born of earth. At the same time, limitations persisted. Pots broke often, sometimes during cooking. They were heavy to carry, unsuitable for long-distance travel. Groups that moved frequently may have left pots behind, shaping new ones when they settled again. This suggests that pottery was most useful in places of repeated occupation, like caves or seasonal camps. The link between cooking technology and mobility is still debated, but fragments clustered in hearth layers suggest that pots remained close to home. Comparisons to other regions sharpen the picture. In Europe, despite similar climates, people continued to roast and stone boil for millennia longer. Only much later did pottery spread. Why the delay? Some argue that European diets relied more on meat and less on starchy plants, reducing need for prolonged boiling. In East Asia, where plant foods were abundant but often difficult to digest, the incentive was stronger. This unresolved mystery highlights how environment and culture interact to shape innovation. Archaeologists stress the significance of such changes. Pottery does not only represent a new material culture, it represents a new relationship to food. Cooking became a process of transformation, not just preparation. The line between raw and edible blurred, as foods once considered marginal became central. This expansion of diet, subtle yet powerful, is one of the reasons humans endured through the harsh millennia of the last glacial maximum. Step by step, the evidence accumulates. Starch grains embedded in pottery walls confirm plant cooking. Lipid residues reveal stews of meat and vegetables. Charred crusts show long heating times. Together, these fragments reconstruct meals long vanished. They allow us to see how clay and fire altered daily life, one simmering pot at a time. From a broader perspective, cooking with pottery laid foundations for future transformations. The ability to boil and store foods would later support farming communities, surplus storage, and settled villages. But at its origin, it was simply survival. Each vessel was a fragile ally against hunger. Its usefulness measured in bowls of softened grain, in acorns made safe, in broths shared by firelight. In the quiet of Xian Rendong Cave, the story lingers. Ashes mark where fires once burned. Bones, plants, and shards lie intermixed. They tell of people who endured winters, who adapted to scarcity, who reshaped their diets through clay and flame. Cooking roots and grains slowly was not only a method, it was a turning point, subtle yet decisive, in the long story of humanity's resilience. The change pottery brought to food was not only practical, it was sensory. When wild plants and animals met fire within clay, something new happened. Flavors deepened, textures softened, aromas filled the cave. Meals once bitter, coarse, or hard to chew became nourishing in ways that appealed to body and memory alike. For Ice Age humans, these subtle shifts mattered. They encouraged persistence with fragile vessels, even when pots cracked or shattered. Pottery was fragile, but the taste of transformation it enabled was strong enough to anchor the practice in daily life. Consider acorns once more. When roasted on stones, their flavor remained dry and astringent. Boiled in clay, the tannins leached away. The result was not only edible, but palatable. A bitter nut became a mild porridge, smoother and easier to swallow. Children who might once have rejected acorns could now eat them. Elders with worn teeth found them manageable. Taste and nutrition combined to expand who could share in meals. Pottery thus wove inclusivity into diet. The same applied to grains. Wild rice, tiny and uneven, became soft when simmered, releasing starch into water. What emerged was more than fuel. It was a warm, filling dish that comforted as much as it nourished. Archaeological residues confirm this shift. Under microscopes, starch grains, swollen and gelatinized, reveal the process of cooking. Scientists can tell that pots once simmered food slowly, transforming raw seeds into something far more palatable. Tubers, too, reveal the difference. Bitter roots softened into mild, starchy broths when boiled. Tough fibers broke down, leaving smooth textures. Meals became easier to digest, releasing energy steadily. For groups living through long winters, such reliability was crucial. But the sensory appeal, flavors mellowed, textures softened, also made meals more desirable. What once was emergency food became comfort food. Animal remains tell a similar story. Bones cracked for marrow could now be boiled, releasing fats into soups. Meat, simmered gently, became tender. Stews combined ingredients, meat with roots, grains with herbs. This blending created flavors unknown before pottery. Lipid residue analysis confirms that fats mixed with plant starches in vessels, evidence of composite meals. Such dishes not only fed bodies but also fostered communal sharing. Bowls of broth could be ladled out, portions divided with ease. A lesser-known detail comes from charred residues on vessel interiors. Some contain microscopic traces of smoke flavoring, likely from cooking directly within embers. This suggests that early cooks enjoyed not only the utility of boiling, but also the subtle flavors imparted by fire. The sensory world of meals was expanding, shaped by clay as much as by ingredients. Still, mysteries endure. Did Ice Age people notice these taste changes consciously, or were they background benefits to survival? Archaeologists cannot answer. What is clear is that pots continue to be made despite their fragility. Utility explains part of this persistence, but pleasure may explain another. The enjoyment of softer, warmer, tastier meals encouraged repetition. Human beings everywhere are drawn to flavor. Even in the Ice Age, this truth likely held. On a planetary scale, this shift echoes far beyond southern China. Everywhere humans lived, food preparation shaped survival. But here, pottery extended preparation into new sensory domains. Meals could simmer slowly, absorbing flavors, releasing aromas. This sensory dimension may have strengthened cultural ties around fire. Sharing tasty meals builds bonds. In small groups of 20 or 30, cohesion mattered. Pottery supported meals thus contributed not only to health but also to social unity. The archaeological record reinforces this. At Xianrendong, layers of occupation reveal repeated use of hearths, with pottery shards intermingled with food remains. Such persistence suggests that people valued the vessels enough to recreate them generation after generation. Each new pot carried forward not only function, but also memory. The taste of foods prepared before, the comfort of familiar meals. Step by step, archaeologists reconstruct this sensory world. Chemical tests show gelatinization of starch, markers of boiling. Residue studies identify fats mingled with plants. Even smoke particles embedded in clay point to aromatic cooking. The evidence, though fragmentary, reveals meals rich in flavor and texture. This detail may seem small, but in the context of Ice Age survival, it is profound. Taste encouraged adoption. Flavor sustained tradition. The transformation also affected mobility. Groups traveling through forests could gather acorns or roots with confidence, knowing that pots at camp would render them palatable. This broadened resource strategies. Instead of depending narrowly on meat, groups could rely on diverse foods. The flexibility reduced risk. In times when game was scarce, plants filled the gap. Pottery was the mediator, turning marginal resources into tasty meals. Comparisons with other regions highlight the uniqueness of this development. In Europe and the Near East, where pottery came much later, groups relied more heavily on roasting and stone boiling. Their diets, though sufficient, lacked the same sensory expansion. East Asian groups, by contrast, cultivated flavors through boiling. This difference may have shaped cultural preferences that echoed for millennia. Why pottery appeared here first remains a mystery, but the sensory rewards of simmering food surely played a role in its persistence. From another angle, pottery also reshaped the rhythm of meals. Roasting is quick, requiring constant attention. Boiling allows slow cooking. A pot set on embers can simmer while other tasks are done. This shift in time management changed daily life. People could weave, carve, or rest while food cooked gently nearby. The aromas filling the cave would remind them of the meal to come. Time itself became more flexible, meals more predictable. Archaeologists sometimes call this a cuisine revolution. It was not agriculture, not settlement, not surplus, but it was a change in how humans related to food. Pottery created cuisines where none had existed, bringing flavors together, softening textures, enhancing palatability. The sensory world of humans expanded, setting the stage for future culinary traditions. On the planetary scale, the significance is clear. Cooking with pottery represents not just technological adaptation, but sensory enrichment. Humans learned not only to survive, but also to savor. In the deep cold of the last glacial maximum, that savor may have meant as much to morale as to nutrition. a warm stew, fragrant and soft, could sustain spirits as well as bodies. In small communities facing uncertainty, such comfort mattered deeply. Even today, when archaeologists hold fragments of soot-darkened clay, they are holding traces of taste. Each shard once carried flavors, aromas, textures that shaped human lives. The evidence is silent, but through science it speaks again. Pottery transformed meals into something more than fuel. It made food delicious. It made survival pleasurable. It made the sensory world of humans wider, richer, and more enduring. Thus, the taste of transformation belongs among the quiet revolutions of prehistory. Born in firelit caves, carried forward by fragile vessels, it altered diets, reshaped communities, and introduced pleasure into necessity. From this point onward, humans would never cook or eat the same way again. On the surfaces of early pottery, marks remain. They are faint but unmistakable. Chord impressions, fingertip dents, and smoothing traces testify to the people who made them. Each vessel, fragile though it was, carried the imprint of its maker's hand. These impressions were not decorations in the later artistic sense. They were practical, accidental, or incidental. Yet they form one of the most intimate links to the individuals of 20,000 years ago. Chord marks are among the most striking. Some fragments from Xianrendong bear parallel grooves, pressed into wet clay before firing. Archaeologists interpret these as impressions from twisted fibers, perhaps cords or mats. They could have been applied intentionally to roughen the surface, making vessels less slippery when handled, or they might result from shaping clay on woven supports, baskets or mats that left their trace. Either way, the impressions record the presence of fibers, a reminder that basketry and weaving already existed alongside pottery. Fingertip impressions are even more personal. When clay was smoothed, pressed, or pinched, the maker's hands left shallow hollows. These were not erased before firing. Thousands of years later, under raking light in laboratories, the prints remain visible. They show where thumbs pressed coils together, where fingers sealed seams. Some impressions are small, suggesting that even younger members of the group might have helped. In this way, pottery carries literal human signatures, connecting present to past with quiet immediacy. Marks also reveal techniques. Some surfaces were scraped with tool, leaving fine striations. Others were burnished, smoothed with pebbles or bones to reduce porosity. Variability across shards indicates experimentation. Early potters tried different methods, learning which surfaces resisted cracking, which held liquids longer, which withstood heat. Each mark is thus both a record of process and a trace of innovation. A lesser-known detail emerges from microscopic analysis. In certain fragments, impressions of plant stems and husks remain embedded in clay. These may represent temper, organic matter mixed deliberately into clay to prevent shrinkage. As the pots were fired, plant material burned away, leaving voids visible under magnification. This technique shows remarkable foresight. It suggests that potters understood, at least empirically, how to strengthen vessels through additives. Knowledge of materials was deeper than the crude appearance of the pots suggests. Yet mysteries surround these impressions. Were chord marks purely functional, or did they carry symbolic meaning? Later, pottery traditions used patterns for identity, style, or ritual. At Xianrendong, the evidence is ambiguous. Some chords may have been used simply as supports for shaping, but the regularity of certain patterns hints at deliberate choice. Archaeologists debate whether symbolism was already present or whether utility alone explains the marks. The truth may never be clear. On the planetary scale, such impressions remind us of the intimacy between humans and their materials. Technology was not distant or abstract. It was tactile, embodied in hands pressing clay, cords weaving patterns, surfaces smoothed with care. The fingerprints on ancient pottery are among the earliest preserved traces of individual human touch. They connect us not only to culture, but to persons, people who lived, worked, and shaped clay by firelight. The presence of cord impressions also points to broader technological networks, and if cords were used in pottery, they were also used for nets, snares, and baskets. Fibers imply weaving, spinning, and knotting skills already well developed. Pottery thus intersects with another suite of technologies, the manipulation of plants into flexible tools. These connections expand the picture of Ice Age innovation. Humans were not working with one material in isolation.
They combined clay, fire, and fiber into systems of survival.
Archaeologists emphasize the durability of such traces. Pottery breaks, yet fragments endure. Fingerprints in clay can survive when entire societies vanish. These impressions outlast stories, languages, and memories. They endure through floods, earthquakes, and erosion. When held in the hand today, they collapse time, bridging millennia. For researchers, they are humbling reminders of continuity. The same ridges and whorls that mark our fingers marked theirs. Step by step, excavators uncover these fragments. A rim sherd shows a chord pattern pressed in diagonal lines. A base sherd reveals smoothing streaks. A wall fragment carries faint hollows of fingertips. Each piece is catalogued, photographed, analyzed. Together, they reconstruct gestures made around Ice Age hearths. Each impression is small, but collectively they form a human record as direct as any inscription. Communities at the time may not have recognized the permanence of these marks. For them, clay vessels were temporary, fragile, often broken within weeks, yet unknowingly they left behind durable records of their labor. The irony is profound. Technologies designed for daily use became archives of human touch. What was once incidental is now central evidence for science. Comparisons with other regions show similar patterns. In Japan's earliest Jomon pottery, cord impressions are abundant, sometimes decorative, sometimes functional. In Siberia, too, early vessels bear cord mark. This convergence suggests that cords were a common tool in shaping and that their impressions often transferred to clay. Whether symbolic meaning was attached remains debated, but the shared presence highlights how simple technologies could leave enduring global signatures. Fingerprints offer a different kind of comparison. In some cases, forensic-style analysis has been attempted, estimating age or sex of potters from ridge dimensions. Results are tentative, but they suggest diversity of makers, both men and women, even adolescents, participated. Pottery was not the domain of specialists but a communal craft. Every fingerprint tells us that many hands contributed. Mysteries remain unresolved. Did these early communities think of pottery as something more than tool? Were the marks valued, noticed, or entirely ignored? Did cord impressions carry clan identities, or were they simply accidents, without written records? Answers elude us. Yet the material evidence forces us to consider these questions, reminding us of the richness of even the simplest artifacts. On a planetary scale, these impressions underscore the fragility and resilience of human presence. Civilizations rise and fall, but fingerprints in clay remain. They embody the paradox of pottery, fragile in life, durable in death. Broken vessels scatter, yet their fragments endure for 20,000 years. The people are gone, their voices lost, but their touch survives, pressed into earth itself. Even today, when scientists lift a sherd from soil, they feel the intimacy of connection. A thumb pressed here, a cord dragged there, a hand smoothing clay across a seam. These gestures are frozen in time, yet they echo with vitality. The maker is anonymous, yet profoundly real. Pottery marks are thus not only archaeological data, but also windows into humanity, reminders of continuity across ages. In the long silence of caves, these impressions persist. Fire has burned out, groups have moved on, climates have shifted, but the clay remains. Marks left by cord and fingertips carry across millennia, whispering of tasks once ordinary, now extraordinary in their endurance. They are small, quiet testimonies of the human story, etched not in stone, but in earth shaped by hand. The first pottery was fragile, thin-walled, uneven, and often poorly fired. The vessels of 20,000 years ago broke easily. Their shards filled the ash layers of caves, scattered across hearth sites, and accumulated in middens. At first glance, such fragility might seem like failure. Why would communities invest time in making something so easily destroyed? Yet the persistence of pottery shows that even fragile inventions can transform life when their benefits outweigh their weaknesses. Archaeologists at Xianrendong and nearby sites note how many fragments appear in successive layers. This repetition means that pots were not rare experiments. They were remade again and again, despite frequent breakage. A cracked rim or shattered base did not discourage their makers. Instead, new clay was gathered, reshaped, and refired. The cycle continued across generations. The fragility of vessels was tolerated, even expected, because their utility justified the effort. Early pots broke for many reasons. Clay without proper temper cracked as it dried. Uneven firing created stress lines. Rapid heating caused explosions. Use in hearths, where flames licked sides directly, weakened walls. Even after surviving the fire, vessels could chip in handling or collapse under weight. Few lasted long. Yet even brief use, long enough to boil a meal, soften roots, or leach tannins, was valuable. A vessel might serve for weeks and then fail, but in that span it extended diets and eased survival. This fragility shaped behavior. Pots were likely made close to where they were used rather than carried long distances. Their weight and weakness discouraged transport. Groups returning to caves each season may have fashioned new vessels, abandoning broken ones behind. This pattern explains why fragments cluster around hearths. Pots lived and died within the space of daily cooking. Their life cycle was short but continuous. A lesser-known detail is evidence of repair. Some fragments bear traces of resin or plant fibers pressed into cracks, suggesting attempts to prolong life. These repairs reveal that vessels were not considered disposable. People valued them enough to mend, however crudely. Even temporary extension mattered. A repaired pot could last another few meals, another round of boiling acorns, another night of warmth. Repair efforts show resilience in both technology and culture. Mysteries remain about how fragile vessels were perceived socially. Were they everyday tools, unnoticed and unremarkable? Or did their novelty give them status within groups? Archaeologists cannot answer. No symbolic markings beyond chord impressions appear, suggesting practical emphasis. Yet the persistence of pottery, despite fragility, implies strong recognition of value. It is possible that the act of making pots, as much as using them, became tradition, an activity tied to group identity, repeated because it worked well enough. On a planetary scale, fragility is a recurring theme of innovation. Stone tools lasted millennia. Pottery did not. Yet fragility did not hinder its spread. Across Eurasia, from southern China to Siberia to Japan, similar fragile vessels appear within a few thousand years. And this convergence shows that fragility was not a fatal flaw. Instead, the balance of benefit outweighed weakness. Humanity's willingness to work with imperfection, to accept breakage as part of use, reflects adaptability. Archaeologists studying fragments often marvel at their abundance. In some layers, sherds outnumber stone tools. This density suggests that even if vessels lasted briefly, they were central in daily life. They were made, broken, discarded, and remade in cycles as regular as meals themselves. Fragility became part of rhythm, not obstacle. This perspective shifts how we view technology. Innovation does not always mean perfection. Sometimes it means persistence with flawed tools that nonetheless change possibilities. Step by step, research reconstructs this dynamic. Experiments with replica pots show how easily early vessels crack in fires. Yet the same replicas demonstrate effectiveness in boiling water and cooking plants. The results mirror ancient evidence, usefulness despite fragility. Archaeologists learn that early potters must have accepted failure rates, producing multiple vessels, knowing some would not survive. This mindset reflects pragmatic resilience, a willingness to endure loss for overall gain. The fragility of pottery also contrasts with durability of fragments. Whole pots rarely survive, but shards endure for tens of millennia. What was fragile in life becomes permanent in death. This paradox is central to archaeology. The very weakness that forced ancient people to remake vessels ensures that we, today, find countless fragments. The abundance of sherds tells us that pottery was common, even if individual pots were short-lived. Communities adapted to fragility in practical ways. Clay was gathered regularly, shaped in batches, fired in groups. By producing multiple vessels, they offset losses. Skills improved slowly, better temper, more careful firing, more consistent shapes. Over generations, fragility decreased, though it never disappeared. The invention moved along a path of refinement, guided by practice. This continuity links fragile beginnings to stronger traditions millennia later. Comparisons with later periods show the arc of improvement. By the time of the Jomon culture in Japan, vessels were thicker, more durable, and sometimes decorated. In Neolithic farming societies, kilns produced strong, long-lasting ceramics. Yet these advancements trace back to fragile ancestors. Without the persistence of early potters who accepted breakage, later developments would not exist. Fragility was not a flaw to avoid, but a stage to pass through. Mysteries also surround the emotional relationship with these vessels. Did groups feel frustration at frequent breakage, or was fragility normalized? Were broken pots discarded carelessly, or with ritual? Archaeological evidence is silent. Shards lie scattered, some buried in ash, some trampled into soil. They reveal little of sentiment, yet they speak of continuity. People made new pots regardless of old failures. Endurance, not frustration. seems the defining trait. On the planetary scale, Matthew's fragility teaches resilience. Humanity thrives not only through robust tools but through persistence with imperfect ones. Pottery's early weakness demonstrates that value is measured not by longevity but by impact. A pot that lasts a week yet enables new foods to be eaten may shape survival more than a stone tool that lasts years. Fragility does not diminish importance. It underscores adaptability. Even today, when archaeologists lift small shards from the soil, they are handling fragments of fragility. Each piece was once part of a vessel that likely failed quickly. Yet collectively, these fragments tell of a tradition that endured for millennia. The paradox remains powerful. What was fragile in the moment becomes enduring evidence across time. In caves of southern China, fragile vessels once simmered roots and softened grains. They cracked, broke, and were abandoned. Yet they returned again and again, remade by hands that saw their worth. The first pottery was fragile, yes. But fragility did not mean failure. It meant resilience, persistence, and the quiet success of a technology that would shape human life forever. The earliest pottery does not remain confined to one cave or one community. Across Eurasia, other groups begin to experiment with clay, fire, and vessel making. Archaeologists trace these scattered discoveries and recognize a broader pattern. The invention of pottery was not singular. It arose independently in several places, responding to local needs and environments. This convergence reveals both the creativity of human groups and the universality of clay as a resource. In southern China, Shanrendong and Yuchanyan caves preserve fragments dating to nearly 20,000 years ago. But farther northeast, in the Amur River basin of Siberia, pottery appears by about 16 to 15,000 years ago. The vessels there are crude, thick-walled, and often decorated with simple impressions. They suggest that people living in cold northern forests also found clay valuable for boiling plants and cooking fish. The distance between these sites is vast, yet the similarity of invention is striking. Japan provides another example. The Jomon tradition, famous for elaborate pottery, begins as early as 16,000 years ago in its simplest forms. These early vessels are plain, small, and utilitarian, much like those of China and Siberia. Over time, Jomon pottery becomes ornate, with elaborate cord-marked patterns and complex shapes. But its roots lie in the same Ice Age experimentation, boiling foods that required long cooking. The parallel timing across East Asia points to either diffusion of ideas or independent discovery under similar pressures. A lesser-known detail emerges from the Russian Far East. At sites along the lower Amur and near Lake Baikal, pottery fragments appear soon after the last glacial maximum. Some are associated with fishing communities, suggesting that boiling fish or processing aquatic plants drove innovation. These contexts differ from the acorn and wild rice diets of southern China. Yet the solution is the same: clay vessels set near fires, fragile but useful. Such variety shows that pottery was not tied to one food or one culture, but adapted to many. Mysteries remain about connections between these regions. Did knowledge of pottery travel with migrating group, carried along river corridors and coastal routes, or did different communities stumble on the same idea independently, inspired by similar challenges? Archaeologists debate this question vigorously. The distances involved are immense, and direct evidence of contact is thin. Yet the rapid appearance of pottery across such wide areas raises the possibility of cultural diffusion. Independent invention is equally plausible. given the universal presence of clay and fire? The question remains unresolved. On a planetary scale, the spread of pottery reflects humanity's broader pattern of convergent innovation. Just as stone tools, fire use, and symbolic art appeared in multiple regions, so too did pottery. When faced with similar pressures, scarcity of digestible foods, cold climates, reliance on starchy plants, different groups found similar answers. This convergence underscores the adaptability of human cognition. Wherever people lived, they drew solutions from the materials at hand. The Siberian examples highlight adaptation to extreme cold. Rivers and lakes froze for much of the year, but during thaws, fish runs provided vital food. Boiling fish in clay vessels extracted maximum nutrition from bones, skins, and flesh. Fatty broths sustained groups through lean months. Pottery thus anchored survival strategies in environments where hunting large game was unpredictable. The vessels were fragile, yet their role in processing fish made them indispensable. In Japan, the context differed. Forested landscapes provided nuts, roots, and shellfish. Cord-marked pottery suited these diets, allowing prolonged boiling and storage. The elaboration of decoration in later periods suggests that once established, pottery quickly gained social and symbolic dimensions. But at its origin, the need was simple, turning difficult foods into nourishing meals. The Jomon innovation, though visually distinct, shares a foundation with the plain fragments of China and Siberia. A lesser-known but intriguing clue comes from lipid residue analysis in early Japanese pottery. Some vessels contain traces of marine oils, showing that fish and shellfish were cooked or stored in them. This evidence aligns with the geography of Japan's coasts, where tidal zones offered abundant resources. Pottery provided a way to use these resources more fully, boiling shells to release nutrients or storing oils for later. The connection between pottery and aquatic food economies is now recognized as a key theme across East Asia. Still, puzzles remain. Why did pottery not appear at the same time in Europe, despite similar climates and needs? Some scholars argue that cultural traditions shaped choices. In Europe, stone boiling and roasting remained dominant. In East Asia, plant-heavy diets created greater incentive for boiling. Others suggest that resource abundance in certain European regions reduced pressure for innovation. The uneven global timeline reminds us that technological change is not inevitable.
It is contingent, shaped by culture, ecology, and chance.
On a global scale, these regional innovations prefigure later agricultural revolutions. Pottery, once established, became central to storage, cooking, and eventually trade. But in its earliest phase, it spread in scattered patches, fragile vessels appearing wherever conditions favored experimentation. The mosaic of sites from southern China to Siberia to Japan shows that humanity's first engagement with pottery was neither uniform nor centralized. It was diverse, adaptive, and plural. Step by step, archaeologists chart this pattern. Radiocarbon dates anchor fragments to precise centuries. Residue analyses reconstruct diets. Comparative studies map similarities in shape and decoration. Through these methods, the larger picture emerges. Pottery was not born in one place alone, but in many, nearly simultaneously, as Ice Age communities confronted the same challenges of survival. The significance of this convergence lies not only in technology but in mindset. Pottery demonstrates a willingness to manipulate Earth itself into tools, to experiment with fire and form, to persist despite frequent breakage. That different groups, separated by thousands of kilometers, embraced this mindset at roughly the same time reveals something fundamental about humanity. Innovation is not linear but recurrent. It arises wherever conditions demand and imagination responds. Even today, holding a shard from Siberia or Japan beside one from Xianrendong reveals the same qualities: soot, darkened surfaces, cord impressions, traces of fingerprints. They testify to separate groups living separate lives, yet solving similar problems with similar means. The vessels may have looked crude, but their significance was profound. They represent a moment when human ingenuity converged across vast spaces, fragile fragments binding distant peoples in a shared story of survival. The appearance of pottery across Eurasia tells us that the invention was not isolated. It was part of a broader wave of experimentation that spanned continents. Each community, faced with hunger, cold, and uncertainty, turned to clay and fire. Each left behind fragile vessels that shattered quickly but endured in fragments. Together, these scattered pieces form a mosaic of innovation, showing that the dawn of pottery was not a single spark, but a constellation of fires lit across the Ice Age world. The Ice Age world was not static. Rivers flowed with shifting currents, coastlines stretched far beyond their modern limits, and valleys opened onto vast plains now drowned beneath the sea. 20,000 years ago, during the last glacial maximum, ocean levels stood more than 100 meters lower than today. Glaciers locked up enormous volumes of water, and the planet's surface transformed. For humans, these transformations were both challenge and opportunity. They shaped where people traveled, what resources they found, and how innovations like pottery spread. Rivers were lifelines. In southern China, streams cut through limestone hills, depositing silts that became raw material for pottery. Riverbanks provided clay for vessels and plants for diets. They also served as travel corridors, guiding movements between caves and seasonal camps. Archaeological sites cluster along these waterways, showing how central rivers were to Ice Age life. Where rivers changed course, human settlement patterns shifted too. Pottery fragments found along ancient channels remind us that technology and water were inseparable. Coastlines stretched outward across exposed continental shelves. The East China Sea was not a sea at all, but a broad plain, threaded with rivers that flowed hundreds of kilometers farther east than today. Across this plain, humans foraged, hunted, and traveled. These landscapes, now submerged, once supported communities who likely also experimented with pottery. Their evidence is hidden beneath waves, yet hints survive in caves on higher ground. The world people inhabited was larger than today, its horizons extended by the absence of ocean. A lesser-known detail comes from studies of pollen and sediment cores. They reveal that during the last glacial maximum, landscapes of East Asia were mosaics, patches of forest, open grasslands, wetlands along rivers. Such diversity created both challenges and opportunities. Some foods were abundant but hard to process: acorns, roots, grasses. Others were seasonal and unpredictable. Pottery fitted this patchwork world by allowing flexible diets. Groups could rely on diverse foods, boiling or simmering, whichever was available. The environmental mosaic mirrored the cultural mosaic of innovation. Yet mysteries remain. Did rivers and expanding shores directly encourage the spread of pottery? Or did the innovation arise independently regardless of geography? Archaeologists debate whether waterways served as conduits of knowledge. It is possible that groups moving along rivers carried both vessels and the idea of making them. It is equally possible that similar conditions along different rivers led to parallel invention. The evidence is incomplete, and the question remains unresolved. On a planetary scale, the reshaping of land and sea was profound. Glaciers covered much of northern Europe and North America, reflecting sunlight, cooling the globe further. Winds swept dust across continents, leaving thick deposits in northern China. Rainfall patterns shifted, deserts expanded, and tropical forests contracted. Humanity adapted to this changing stage with mobility, flexibility, and innovation. Pottery was one response among many. It linked survival strategies to rivers and plains that looked different from the landscapes we know today. In Siberia, rivers like the Amur and Lena carved routes through taiga and tundra. Along their banks, early pottery appeared, associated with fishing communities. The link between aquatic resources and clay vessels is clear. Boiling fish, extracting oils, and softening bones all required containers that resisted fire. The rivers provided both food and clay, binding environment and technology. In Japan as well, rivers and coastal plains supported shellfish gathering and nut collection. Cord-marked pottery there reflects adaptation to these watery landscapes. The significance of rivers extended beyond resources. They also created pathways for movement. Humans followed waterways into new territories, encountering other groups, exchanging ideas, and perhaps sharing knowledge of pottery. Migration along rivers could explain similarities across distant sites. Even if direct contact cannot be proven, the parallel role of rivers as both sustenance and route suggests convergent patterns of innovation. Step by step, archaeologists piece together this watery past. Sediment layers reveal ancient floodplains. Microfossils in cores show vegetation shifts. Stone tools and pottery fragments cluster in caves near river valleys. Together, this evidence reconstructs a landscape where rivers were central threads of life. Pottery's appearance in these contexts was not accidental. It was woven into the very fabric of Ice Age geography. Fragility of vessels influenced how they were used along rivers. Pots were likely left at campsites, not carried during long moves. Groups may have returned seasonally to the same riverbanks, shaping new vessels each time. This rhythm mirrors seasonal flows. Water rising in flood, receding to expose clay. Pottery was thus tied not only to geography but to time, to the cycles of rivers themselves. A lesser-known example comes from submerged shelf studies. Marine archaeologists investigating the East China Sea have identified ancient river channels preserved underwater. Though direct pottery finds are absent, the scale of these plains suggests human presence. As seas rose after the Ice Age, these landscapes disappeared. Pottery traditions that once flourished there may be lost forever. This hidden world reminds us how much of early human history lies beneath oceans, invisible but crucial. Mysteries linger about whether pottery enabled longer stays near rivers, reducing mobility by supporting broader diets. Some scholars argue that vessels allowed groups to linger in resource-rich areas, cooking diverse foods and storing some for later. Others caution that early pots were too fragile for long storage. The debate continues, but it highlights pottery's potential to change settlement rhythms. Even if camps remained seasonal, the ability to exploit more foods deepened human connection to rivers and plains. On the planetary scale, expanding shores and exposed shelves also affected migrations. Lower seas connected lands, creating routes to Japan and perhaps even across Beringia toward the Americas. Though pottery itself did not travel those vast distances at that time, the same environmental forces that shaped coastlines shaped human movement. Pottery's birth in East Asia is part of this larger picture, a global human response to glacial extremes and shifting geography. The role of rivers in innovation is further emphasized by continuity. Long after the Ice Age, river valleys would become cradles of agriculture and civilization. The Yellow River in China, the Nile in Africa, the Tigris and Euphrates in Mesopotamia all became centers of pottery-rich societies. The first steps at Xianrendong foreshadow this trajectory. The link between rivers, clay, and human ingenuity is deep, enduring across time. Today, archaeologists walking riverbanks in Jiangxi or Hunan sometimes still find clay exposures that ancient people likely used. To stand at these sites is to sense the continuity of landscape. The rivers have shifted course, but the materials remain. Clay, water, and fire once combined here to change the path of human survival. The fragments left behind testify that fragile vessels were part of a much larger story, one written by rivers themselves. Thus, the Ice Age rivers and expanding shores shaped not only landscapes but also possibilities. They offered clay, food, and routes of movement. They framed the conditions in which pottery was born, fragile yet transformative. The waters rose and fell, lands appeared and vanished. But within this shifting world, humans found stability in vessels of clay. Even as coastlines drowned and plains disappeared, pottery endured, carried forward by the people who learned to mold earth, water, and fire into tools for survival. The presence of pottery in southern China 20,000 years ago poses a deep question. Why here? And why then? Agriculture had not yet begun. Villages did not exist. People were still hunters and gatherers, moving through seasonal landscapes. Yet in the midst of the last glacial maximum, fragile clay vessels emerged. The timing defies older assumptions that pottery must follow farming. Instead, the evidence at Xianrendong and Yuchanyan shows that pottery arose thousands of years before domesticated plants or permanent settlements. Archaeologists grapple with this puzzle. One explanation emphasizes climate stress. During the last glacial maximum, cold and unpredictable weather limited food options. People turned to hard or bitter resources like acorns, wild rice, and roots. Processing these foods required new techniques, and pottery provided the solution. In this view, necessity was the mother of invention. Harsh environments forced people to experiment, and clay vessels were the outcome. Another theory highlights cultural creativity. Humans, even in difficult times, innovate not only for survival, but also for curiosity and expression. Clay had been used for figurines in Europe thousands of years earlier, at sites like Dolní Věstonice. The knowledge that clay could be hardened by fire was already present in the human imagination. Pottery may have been rediscovered in East Asia as part of this broader creative tendency. Perhaps people enjoyed shaping vessels, noticed their utility, and carried the tradition forward. A lesser-known detail complicates the picture. Some of the earliest Chinese pottery appears in contexts not clearly linked to extreme scarcity. Yuchanyan Cave, for instance, contains abundant remains of animals such as deer and tortoise. Food may not have been critically short there. If so, pottery's invention cannot be explained solely as a desperate measure. It may have offered convenience, taste, or even social value beyond strict necessity. The debate remains open. Mysteries also surround why pottery did not emerge earlier in other regions facing equal or greater stress. In Ice Age Europe, groups endured severe cold yet never adopted pottery until much later. They relied on roasting, stone boiling, and hides for cooking. Why did East Asia diverge? Was it diet, environment, or simple chance? Some suggest that plant-heavy diets in southern China provided greater incentive to develop boiling technologies. Others argue that cultural traditions in Europe focused on meat, reducing need for such vessels. No single answer satisfies all data. On a planetary scale, the puzzle reflects the unevenness of human innovation. Fire was discovered hundreds of thousands of years ago, yet controlled use varied across regions. Symbolic art flourished in some places long before others. Pottery follows the same pattern, not universal, but patchy, appearing where conditions and choices converged. This uneven timeline is a reminder that technological revolutions are not predetermined. They emerge where circumstances align with imagination. Archaeologists continue to refine dating to address the mystery. At Xianrendong, radiocarbon samples from layers containing pottery consistently fall between 19 and 20,000 years ago. This makes them the oldest known ceramic vessels. But debates persist over precise calibration. Slight variations in dating methods could shift timelines by centuries. Researchers double-check charcoal samples, charred food crusts, and stratigraphic layers to confirm results. The consensus remains pottery here is genuinely older than any other, but exact timing continues to be scrutinized. The absence of earlier pottery elsewhere raises another question. Was it invented multiple times but not preserved? Clay vessels are fragile. If made and discarded in open-air camps rather than caves, they may have eroded without trace. Perhaps pottery arose independently in other places, only to vanish without leaving evidence. This possibility cannot be ruled out. Archaeology records survival, not absence. The true distribution of early pottery may be wider than the evidence suggests. A lesser-known insight comes from ethnographic analogy. In some modern hunter-gatherer societies, pottery is made without agriculture, used primarily for boiling wild foods. These parallels show that farming is not a prerequisite. Pottery can belong to mobile, foraging lifeways, provided resources and traditions encourage it. Xianrendong fits this model: small groups, seasonal camps, diverse diets, and a willingness to experiment. The early invention of pottery here may not be anomaly, but natural outcome of particular conditions. Still, the timing remains enigmatic. Why precisely 20,000 years ago, and not 5,000 years earlier? Some scholars point to demographic pressures. Populations in East Asia may have been growing despite climate stress, increasing competition for food. With more people drawing on limited resources, new methods of processing marginal foods became urgent. Pottery, fragile though it was, expanded the menu. Innovation, thus, may have been triggered by social as well as environmental pressure. On the planetary scale, these debates matter because they reshape the story of human progress. For much of the 20th century, archaeologists linked pottery with agriculture, assuming a neat sequence. Farming leads to storage, storage leads to pottery. The discoveries at Xianrendong overturned this view. Now the timeline is more complex. Pottery does not wait for farming. It can emerge among mobile foragers long before domestication. This realization forces reconsideration of how technology and subsistence interact. Comparisons with Japan's early Jomon pottery sharpen the point. There, vessels appear several millennia later, also among hunter-gatherers. The Jomon case confirms that pottery is not bound to farming. It can thrive in contexts of rich foraging, where boiling nuts, roots, and shellfish is valuable. Together, the Chinese and Japanese evidence reveal pottery as a flexible innovation arising independently wherever it meets need. Yet unresolved mysteries continue. Did cultural exchange link these regions, or did they invent separately? Was the knowledge of firing clay figurines in Europe remembered somehow in Asia, transmitted across vast distances? Or did people simply experiment anew when they saw clay harden in fire? The answers remain elusive. What is clear is that pottery's invention was not a single event, but part of humanity's wider story of creativity. Step by step, archaeologists piece together this puzzle. Each fragment adds data: shape, thickness, residue, radiocarbon age. Patterns emerge, but questions persist. The why of pottery, why here, why then, remains as fascinating as the when. The search for explanations continues to drive research, drawing attention to the complex interplay of environment, diet, culture, and chance in shaping human innovation. Even today, when holding a shard from Xianrendong, one feels the weight of the mystery. The clay is fragile, the surface soot-darkened, the rim uneven. Yet it represents a leap forward at a moment when survival was harsh and uncertain. Why these people, in this cave, chose to mold clay into vessels remains partly hidden. But the act itself changed human history. Pottery's early birth in East Asia is both a fact and a riddle, an enduring question at the heart of archaeology. Beneath the soil of Xianrendong Cave, archaeologists uncover not only pottery fragments, but also the dark traces of ancient fires. Layers of ash, charcoal, and burned earth tell of countless hearths that once warmed small groups through the Ice Age, cold. These hearths are not mere remnants of warmth, they are archives of daily life. Within them lie charred bones, blackened seeds, and pottery sherds, each piece holding part of the story. Together, they show how fire and clay intertwined to support survival. Excavations reveal distinct hearth features: shallow basins dug into the cave floor, lined with stones or simply ringed by ash. Some are surrounded by clusters of artifacts, evidence that activities radiated outward from the fire's glow. Pottery shards lie in these contexts, many darkened on their outer surfaces, some still carrying residues of food on their interiors. The association is direct. These were vessels placed into or beside flames, used until they cracked or shattered, then discarded into the fire itself. The residues they preserve are invaluable. Under microscopes, scientists identify starch granules swollen from heating, the telltale sign of boiling. Chemical analysis of crusts reveals both plant and animal signatures: acorns, wild rice, deer fats, fish oils. Each crust, charred hard against clay, is a frozen moment of cooking, a direct record of meals consumed 20 millennia ago. No other artifact preserves such intimate detail of daily life. Pottery becomes a vessel not only for food but for memory, holding microscopic traces across ages. A lesser-known detail lies in the soils beneath hearths. Blackened layers rich in carbon indicate repeated burning in the same places. Over centuries, groups returned, built new fires atop old, and left behind cumulative archives of ash. Some layers contain fragments of pots intentionally placed, perhaps as disposal, perhaps as makeshift fuel. Clay, once vessel, became part of the fire again. These cycles of use and discard show the rhythm of habitation, the way groups embedded their lives into the cave floor itself. Mysteries remain about how often these hearths burned. Did groups occupy caves continuously through winters or seasonally at particular times of scarcity? The evidence is debated, Dense ash layers suggest long-term stays, but gaps in sediment imply intervals of abandonment. Pottery fragments in multiple layers, however, show that whenever groups returned, they continued to make and use vessels. The tradition endured across time, bound to the fires they lit again and again. On the planetary scale, Kamchor, fire was humanity's universal companion. Every group across continents relied on hearths, yet here in southern China the combination of fire and pottery created something new. The ability to simmer food for long periods, to transform plants into safe meals, linked directly to the hearth's steady heat. Without fire, pottery remained soft clay. Without pottery, fire could only roast or char. Together, they expanded possibilities, creating diets more diverse and nutrition more reliable. Charred animal bones in the hearths tell complementary stories. Deer, boar, fish, and tortoises were consumed, sometimes roasted, sometimes boiled. Bones show cut marks from stone tools, fractures from marrow extraction, and burned scars from flames. Mixed among them lie seeds and nutshells, some blackened, some preserved by charring. These remains confirm that diets were mixed and opportunistic. Pottery amplified this flexibility, making it easier to process plants alongside meat, to combine ingredients, to extract nutrients more fully. Archaeologists sometimes describe hearths as time capsules. Each layer of ash is a snapshot of a particular occupation. At Shanrendong, sequences of hearths stacked one atop another form a stratigraphy of meals. From these layers, researchers reconstruct not only diet but also rhythm, how often groups returned, what resources they favored, how traditions changed. The pottery shards embedded in these layers are central to that reconstruction, serving as markers of technological persistence. A lesser-known insight comes from experimental archaeology. Researchers reproduce Ice Age-style hearths, shaping crude clay vessels and placing them among coals. The results mirror ancient evidence. Many pots crack, but some survive long enough to cook meals. Charred residues form within hours, remarkably similar to those found in caves. Such experiments confirm that the link between fire, clay, and food is plausible, not imagined. They show how ancient hearths could indeed have produced the archaeological record we now excavate. Still, mysteries endure. Did people cook only for immediate consumption, or did they sometimes prepare food in advance? Early pottery was fragile, limiting long-term storage, yet residues suggest repeated use, not one-time experiments. Perhaps soups or broths simmered through the evening, feeding groups over hours. Perhaps cooked foods were shared, portioned, and carried short distances. Archaeology cannot reveal these details fully, but the clues of charred crusts point towards sustained culinary routines. On the planetary scale, the significance of these hearths lies in their continuity. Fire had been part of human life for hundreds of thousands of years, but only with pottery did fire's role expand into new dimensions. Now it was not only for warmth, protection, or roasting. It was for slow, transformative cooking that reshaped diets. Pottery vessels buried in ash layers of caves capture the moment when this shift began, anchoring the global story of human adaptation in fragile fragments. The hearths also highlight social dimensions. Around fires, people gathered, shared meals, and taught one another. Children learned to tend flame, to shape clay, to stir pots. Elders passed on knowledge of tempering, firing, and cooking, The persistence of pottery across centuries shows that such knowledge was remembered, not lost. Hearths were classrooms as well as kitchens, sites where innovation became tradition. Comparisons with other sites enrich the picture. In Siberia, hearths with pottery fragments reveal fish processing. In Japan, they reveal nut boiling and shellfish cooking. Across East Asia, the association is consistent. Wherever pottery appears, it is tied to fire, food, and ash. This pattern underscores that pottery was never an isolated artifact. It was part of a living system centered on the hearth. Even today, when archaeologists lift a sherd darkened by ancient flames, they are touching both earth and fire. The soot remains visible, black against clay, unchanged by 20 millennia. It is evidence of a moment when a pot sat among embers, transforming raw plants or bones into edible meals. Such fragments connect us directly to people who once watched fires crackle in caves, who smelled the aroma of boiling food, who relied on fragile vessels to sustain them through winters. Thus, the buried fragments and ancient fires of Xianrendong tell more than technical details. They tell of resilience, persistence, and daily life in the harshest of times. Each hearth is a story of survival. Each shard is a memory of meals shared. Together, they reveal that even in fragile beginnings, pottery was central, woven into the rhythms of firelight and the endurance of humanity. The invention of pottery did not stand alone. It emerged as part of a wider web of human innovation during the waning millennia of the Ice Age. In caves and camps scattered across Eurasia, evidence shows that humans were experimenting with many technologies at once. Pottery joined this expanding toolkit, complementing weaving, hafting of stone tool, and symbolic art. Each of these developments extended human capacity to survive, adapt, and imagine new ways of life. Weaving is among the less visible but no less significant elements of this web. Plant fibers rarely survive for 20 millennia, yet indirect evidence abounds. Impressions of cords on pottery, fragments of twisted fibers preserved in charred deposits, and wear marks on tools suggest that weaving and basketry were already widespread. Nets, mats, and bags allowed groups to transport food, carry infants, and store materials. The same cords sometimes pressed into clay as pots were formed, leaving impressions that endure when the fibers themselves are long gone. Pottery and weaving thus intersect, each pointing to a world where plants were manipulated not only for food but for structure. Hafting of stone tools represents another thread. By attaching blades and points to wooden handles with resin and sinew, humans expanded the reach of their tools. Spears and axes became more effective, knives more precise. Archaeological finds of microliths, tiny stone blades likely hafted into composite tools, illustrate this shift. Pottery fits into the same spirit of experimentation, combining materials, extending function, reshaping the ordinary into the extraordinary. A lesser-known detail lies in pigments. Red ochre, charcoal, and other minerals appear in Ice Age contexts used for body painting, rock art, and perhaps symbolic rituals. At some sites in China, ochre appears in layers near pottery fragments, though their relationship is uncertain. The juxtaposition reminds us that innovation did not unfold in isolation. Functional technologies like pottery coexisted with symbolic expressions, together weaving the fabric of culture. Humans sought not only to eat and survive, but also to mark meaning onto their world. Mysteries remain about how these innovations interacted. Did weaving influence pottery design by providing patterns? Did hafting and adhesives inspire experiments with tempering clay? Archaeologists can only speculate. The evidence is fragmentary, but the convergence of multiple technologies in the same periods suggests dynamic creativity. People were not static, repeating traditions unchanged. They were tinkerers, combining elements, reshaping practices, learning by trial and error. Pottery was one outcome of this restless curiosity. On a planetary scale, this web of innovation reveals humanity's unique adaptive strategy. Other species evolved physical traits to suit environments. Humans, by contrast, developed technologies to extend their reach: fire, clothing, tools, art. And pottery were not biological but cultural adaptations. They spread rapidly, far more quickly than genetic evolution could. This flexibility allowed humans to thrive in deserts, forests, tundras, and coasts. Pottery, though fragile, was part of this grand adaptive pattern. Archaeologists sometimes speak of a broad-spectrum revolution in late Ice Age Eurasia. This phrase refers to the diversification of diets as humans began to use smaller game, more plants, and aquatic resources alongside traditional large prey. Pottery aligns with this trend. By boiling acorns, roots, fish, and grains, pots expanded what was edible. Weaving nets and traps expanded what was catchable. Hafted tools expanded what was huntable. Symbolic practices expanded what was thinkable. Together, these shifts marked a threshold in human history, not yet farming, but already reshaping environments through ingenuity. A lesser-known example comes from residues on early pottery in Japan. Some vessels contain traces of marine oils, suggesting that shellfish and fish were processed within them. This aligns with evidence of woven nets, which would have captured such resources. The interplay is clear: weaving enabled capture, pottery enabled cooking, and together they broadened diets. The web of innovation was synergistic, each thread strengthening the others. Yet puzzles endure. Why did some innovations spread widely while others remained local? Pottery appeared in East Asia early, yet took millennia to appear in Europe. Weaving was surely universal, but its material traces vanish, leaving uncertain timelines. Hafting became nearly global, while certain symbolic practices remained regional. These uneven distributions highlight the role of culture, chance, and environment. Innovation is not uniform. It emerges where needs and opportunities align. On the planetary scale, this unevenness underscores the diversity of human pathways. There was no single trajectory toward progress. Instead, multiple webs of innovation formed across continents, sometimes intersecting, sometimes separate. Pottery's early appearance in China is one node in this global network. Not the whole story, but it exemplifies the process. Fragile experiments that endure because they fit into wider systems of adaptation. Step by step, archaeologists reconstruct these connections. Fingerprint impressions on pottery link to weaving. Stone tool assemblages near hearths link to hafting. Pigments in the same layers link to symbolism. Each find enriches the picture of communities whose lives were filled with making, testing, and combining. Pottery may seem humble, but it sits within a constellation of technologies that together transformed the human condition. The endurance of this web is evident in continuity. Weaving persists to the present in every culture. Hafted tools evolve into metal, then into machines. Pigments and symbols evolve into art and writing. Pottery evolves into ceramics, porcelain, and industrial materials, each thread, once fragile and tentative, becomes part of the long weave of history. The first pots at Xianrendong belong to this deeper pattern, fragile shards embedded in the tapestry of innovation. A lesser-known observation is how innovation itself requires social memory. A pot cannot be made by accident alone. It requires repeated practice, teaching, and tradition. So too with weaving, hafting, and symbolism. The web of innovation is therefore also a web of knowledge transmission. Around Ice Age hearths, elders showed children how to twist fibers, how to fit stones to wood, how to paint with ochre, how to shape and fire clay. Knowledge passed hand to hand, word to word, generation to generation. This continuity is as important as invention itself. Still, mysteries persist about how innovations were valued. Did groups see pottery as equal to other technologies, or as a marginal experiment? Did weaving carry symbolic meaning as well as utility? Did pigments mark ritual as distinct from daily life? Archaeology can suggest but not answer. Yet the very survival of these practices shows that whatever their meanings, they endured. Utility, expression, and tradition blended into the fabric of culture. On the planetary scale, the broader significance lies in the human capacity to innovate across domains simultaneously. Pottery was not a single spark, but part of a constellation. This constellation shines across time, reminding us that survival was never about one tool alone. It was about webs, complex, interconnected, resilient, even today. When archaeologists hold a soot-darkened sherd, they are reminded of this web. The fragment is humble, but it speaks of more than itself. It speaks of weaving cords, hafting blades, painting with pigments, and sharing knowledge. It is a thread within a larger fabric, and like all threads, its strength lies not only in its own form, but in the network it helped weave. Thus, pottery belongs to a wider web of innovation. Born of clay and fire, marked by cords and fingerprints, it stands beside other technologies of the late Ice Age. Together they represent humanity's genius for adaptation, fragile at first, resilient in the long run, shaping a path that would lead to the settled worlds of the future. The spread of pottery across East Asia marked a critical threshold in human settlement patterns. In regions such as the Yangtze River Valley, the earliest ceramic vessels appear alongside increasingly permanent campsites. Hearths are more substantial, storage pits more numerous, and the distribution of artifacts suggests repeated use of the same locations. Humans began to spend longer periods in one place, exploiting both terrestrial and aquatic resources with greater efficiency. This slow shift from highly mobile foraging to semi-sedentary life set the stage for new social arrangements. Pottery enabled long-term storage, which in turn supported more complex planning for food acquisition. Seeds, nuts, and grains could be kept for months, allowing small communities to survive seasonal fluctuations. Fish and shellfish, sometimes smoked or boiled in early pots, could be transported to higher ground or inland sites, extending the reach of diet beyond immediate foraging areas. Archaeologists analyzing residue on pottery fragments in southern China have found traces of freshwater fish lipids alongside plant starches. These findings indicate an increasingly mixed diet and a level of food preservation previously impossible with perishable containers alone. A lesser-known detail comes from pottery's association with ritual and symbolic behavior. Some of the earliest vessels were decorated with cord impressions or simple geometric patterns. While the functional purpose of the pots was clear, the decorative elements suggest a simultaneous concern with identity, status, or group cohesion. These impressions sometimes match the patterns found on woven mats or baskets, indicating a shared visual culture. The act of marking clay may have reinforced social bonds or conveyed messages about family groups or seasonal cycles. Even when no explicit symbolic meaning can be confirmed, these traces reflect the human tendency to combine utility with expression. Mysteries remain about the origins and transmission of ceramic technology. Why did pottery first appear in East Asia and not simultaneously elsewhere? Some researchers propose that environmental factors, such as abundant clay deposits near rivers and lakes, made experimentation more feasible. Others suggest social or cognitive developments were critical. Perhaps larger or more stable groups provided the time and labor necessary for repeated trials with clay. The precise combination of conditions remains uncertain, but the result was transformative. Once discovered, potteries spread gradually across neighboring regions, adapted to local resources and cooking needs. Planetary scale observations highlight the interplay between climate and technology. The late Pleistocene was marked by fluctuating temperatures, changing rainfall patterns, and shifting river courses. Rising temperatures in the Holocene gradually stabilized freshwater systems, expanding wetlands, lakes, and fertile floodplains. These ecological changes made it possible to rely more consistently on plants and fish, enhancing the utility of storage vessels. In effect, the environment provided both opportunity and constraint, shaping the timing and form of human innovation. Pottery also reflects scaling in social complexity. Large vessels require more labor and cooperative techniques, from clay extraction and tempering to shaping, drying, and firing. Hearths and kilns, whether simple open fires or rudimentary enclosed pits, demanded careful monitoring to avoid cracking or explosion. The communal aspects of production may have reinforced shared knowledge, apprenticeship, and collective decision-making. Small errors could destroy a vessel, emphasizing careful practice and intergenerational transmission of expertise. These skills, once learned, could be applied to other materials and crafts, creating a cumulative effect of technological knowledge. The evidence of early pottery in coastal Japan illustrates both innovation and adaptation. Shell middens contain pots with residues of marine products, suggesting careful attention to cooking techniques for fish, shellfish, and seaweeds. These coastal communities likely faced seasonal shifts in availability, requiring flexible strategies. Pottery enabled them to store surplus food, facilitating travel between resource patches while maintaining a reliable nutritional base. The combination of pottery and mobility underscores the diversity of strategies humans employed in the same era. Some groups became semi-sedentary, while others remained highly mobile, both using ceramics in ways suited to their environments. A lesser-known observation arises from the use of clay itself. Early potters often mixed clay with sand, crushed shells, or organic material, known as temper, to prevent cracking during drying and firing. Such choices indicate experimentation, trial and error, and careful observation of material properties. The precise recipes likely varied from one community to another, suggesting local innovation. No single method dominated, and yet the underlying principle, strengthening clay through additive materials, demonstrates a consistent logic rooted in materials science long before formal understanding existed. Mysteries persist regarding the social role of decorated versus plain pottery. Some sites contain highly ornate vessels alongside functional, undecorated counterparts. Did decorated pots serve ceremonial purposes while plain ones were everyday tools? Were certain designs restricted to particular families or clans? Archaeologists can infer patterns from distribution and context, but definitive answers remain elusive. Even without full understanding, the presence of decoration hints at cognitive and cultural sophistication, a human awareness that objects could carry meaning beyond immediate survival. Planetary scale connections also appear in subsistence patterns. As humans used rivers and lakes more intensively, they altered landscapes through trampling, selective harvesting, and sediment displacement. These subtle changes may have affected local hydrology and plant communities. Pottery, by enabling storage and cooking, allowed groups to intensify resource use, indirectly influencing ecosystems. Humans did not merely adapt to the environment, they interacted with it in ways that would accumulate across centuries, creating feedback loops between culture and ecology. The scale of pottery innovation can also be seen in its geographic reach. From southern China, the practice gradually moved northward and eastward, reaching the Korean peninsula and the Japanese archipelago. Each community adapted techniques to local clay sources, firing conditions, and dietary needs. The spread was neither rapid nor uniform. Isolated regions developed distinct styles and methods. Yet the underlying principle, shaping, drying, and firing clay to store and cook food, remained constant. In this way, pottery acted as both a technology and a cultural bridge across landscapes, connecting groups separated by rivers, mountains, and forests. Even as these early ceramic traditions developed, human life remained precarious. Seasonal fluctuations, floods, storms, and changing animal populations continued to challenge communities. Pottery did not eliminate risk, but it provided a buffer, a way to store excess, preserve nutrients, and plan for scarcity. This ability to plan and store food reflects a broader cognitive shift, one that combines foresight, experimentation, and social coordination. The consequences would resonate far beyond the immediate context, influencing agriculture, settlement, and social organization in the millennia to come. In sum, the expansion of pottery in East Asia illustrates a critical stage in human adaptation. It was intertwined with subsistence strategies, social learning, symbolic expression, and ecological awareness. Decorative patterns hint at identity and meaning, residues reveal diet and cooking, temper materials show experimentation and material knowledge. The emergence of pottery represents a convergence of environmental opportunity, cognitive capacity, and cultural transmission. These fragile vessels, often preserved only as fragments, carry profound lessons about the ingenuity, adaptability, and persistence of human communities in the late Pleistocene. By the time pottery had firmly established itself across East Asia, human societies were undergoing significant transformations. Semi-sedentary settlements had become more common, allowing repeated use of the same land and consistent exploitation of nearby resources. This shift did not occur uniformly. Some communities remained mobile, following seasonal cycles of fish, shellfish, and terrestrial game, while others invested in the construction of durable hearths, storage pits, and clay-lined dwellings. Pottery played a central role in these developments, providing a means to store, prepare, and transport food across both short and longer distances. The combination of pottery and resource management demonstrates an early understanding of preservation and planning. Seeds, nuts, and grains could be stored over several months, while fish and other perishable items could be smoked, boiled, or fermented in ceramic vessels. Analysis of lipid residues on pottery fragments from sites along the lower Yangtze River reveals mixtures of freshwater fish, wild tubers, and nuts. This evidence points to diversified diets that balanced protein intake, carbohydrates, and essential fats. humans were increasingly able to buffer themselves against periods of scarcity, a critical advantage in the fluctuating climates of the late Pleistocene. A lesser-known detail emerges from the spatial arrangement of pottery within settlements. Vessels were often clustered near hearths or within designated storage areas, suggesting a level of planning and organization. Some sites reveal subtle patterns, decorated vessels located in more central or communal spaces, plain storage jars in peripheral areas. The intentional placement may reflect social hierarchies, communal sharing practices, or ritual significance. While the exact meanings remain elusive, these arrangements indicate that pottery functioned not only as a practical tool, but also as a medium for human interaction, memory, and identity. Mysteries remain regarding the diffusion of ceramic technology across vast regions. How knowledge of pottery making spread between distant groups is still debated. Some researchers propose trade networks, seasonal gatherings, or shared river corridors as conduits. Others suggest independent invention, arising from similar environmental conditions and cognitive capacities. The coexistence of multiple techniques, hand-shaped, coiled, or slab-built, alongside varying firing methods, suggests that knowledge transfer was selective and adaptive. Each community adopted and modified practices to suit local materials, fuel sources, and dietary preferences, creating a rich tapestry of technological diversity. Planetary scale observations emphasize the influence of climate and ecology on human behavior. Rising Holocene temperatures stabilized river systems, expanded wetlands, and increased the reliability of freshwater resources. These environmental shifts made semi-sedentary life more feasible, while pottery allowed humans to store and process food effectively. In effect, climate provided opportunity, but human innovation converted that opportunity into tangible survival strategies. Repeated occupation of floodplains, coupled with intensive resource extraction, also initiated subtle ecological feedbacks, from soil compaction to changes in plant and animal distributions. Humans were beginning to shape their environment on scales previously unseen. The production of pottery required both material knowledge and cooperative effort. Extracting clay, tempering it with sand, crushed shells, or organic matter, and shaping vessels demanded careful observation and experience. Firing vessels was particularly delicate. Open pit fires or rudimentary kilns could easily crack or explode pottery if temperatures fluctuated too rapidly. The skill required suggests apprenticeship systems, intergenerational teaching, and careful observation of material properties. These practices reinforced social cohesion and transmitted technical expertise across decades, laying the groundwork for increasingly complex material cultures. Evidence from coastal sites in Japan demonstrates adaptive strategies to maritime resources. Shell middens often contain pots with residues of seaweed, shellfish, and small fish. These communities faced seasonal variation in available resources and utilized pottery to store and process marine foods. The vessels permitted partial preservation and allowed transport between sites. This combination of mobility and semi-sedentary storage highlights the versatility of early human strategies. Some populations optimized for stability, while others maintained mobility, both benefiting from ceramic technology tailored to their specific environmental conditions. A subtle detail concerns the decoration of pottery. Impressions, incisions, or cord-marked patterns often appear alongside utilitarian vessels. While the symbolic significance remains uncertain, such decoration reflects human interest in aesthetics, social identity, and possibly group affiliation. Decorative techniques were not uniform. Different communities employed unique patterns, reinforcing regional diversity. This intersection of utility and expression illustrates that even simple technological innovations carried cultural and cognitive dimensions. Mysteries also surround the role of pottery in ritual or social practices. Some decorated vessels are found in contexts suggesting ceremonial use, while plain storage jars appear in everyday areas. Did certain designs convey status, lineage, or seasonal markers? Archaeologists can infer patterns, but definitive interpretations remain elusive. Regardless, the careful shaping, placement, and firing of pots reveal an understanding that objects could hold meaning beyond immediate practical function. Planetary scale implications extend to human settlement and landscape modification. Repeated occupation of sites for pottery production, food processing, and storage altered soils and local vegetation. Hearths, kilns, and pits subtly reshaped microenvironments, and patterns of human activity may have influenced nearby waterways and plant communities. These early interactions between humans and their surroundings illustrate the beginnings of ecological feedbacks that would intensify in later millennia. The geographic spread of pottery demonstrates both innovation and adaptation. From southern China, ceramic practices moved northward into temperate regions and eastward toward the Korean peninsula and the Japanese archipelago. Local variations in clay, firing techniques, and vessel form reflect environmental adaptation and cultural differentiation. While the fundamental principle of shaping and firing clay remained, each community applied it according to local needs. Pottery thus acted as both technology and cultural bridge, connecting people over distances that could span hundreds of kilometers. Even with these advances, human life remained delicate. Seasonal changes, floods, storms, and fluctuating animal populations continued to challenge communities. Pottery did not eliminate risk but provided a buffer, a means to store surplus, preserve nutrients, and plan for lean periods. This capability reflects broader cognitive developments, combining foresight, experimentation, and social cooperation. Early humans were beginning to manipulate both environment and technology in ways that shaped long-term survival prospects. In conclusion, pottery represents a milestone in human prehistory. It is intertwined with settlement patterns, subsistence strategies, social learning, and cultural expression. Decorative patterns hint at identity. Residue analysis reveals diet, and tempering practices indicate experimentation and observation. Through these fragile vessels, we glimpse the ingenuity, adaptability, and persistence of human communities in the late Pleistocene and early Holocene. Pottery allowed humans to store, cook, and transport food, stabilize diets, and create lasting connections with place and community. Each fragment, preserved through millennia, testifies to the profound transformations that this simple yet revolutionary technology enabled. Far away, the last embers of an ancient kiln fade into the night. The clay vessels, once shaped by careful hands, remain as quiet witnesses of human ingenuity. They tell of repeated journeys to rivers and forests, of the observation of fire, of the patient accumulation of knowledge across generations. Each fragment carries traces of meals shared, of seeds stored for winter, of water boiled to sustain life in uncertain seasons. Even now, thousands of years later, these remnants remind us of the delicate balance humans maintained with their environment. Pottery allowed communities to store surplus, to plan ahead, and to stabilize diets. It offered more than practical utility. It became a vessel for memory, identity, and perhaps even ritual. Yet many questions linger. How did knowledge of clay and fire first spread between distant groups? Which patterns signified belonging and which were purely functional? Some answers remain elusive, locked within the silent soil and buried hearths of early settlements. Planetary change continued around these communities, rising waters, shifting coastlines, and the slow retreat of glaciers transformed landscapes that humans had begun to shape. In turn, human activity, small though it was, left traces on soil, vegetation, and waterways. Early pottery embodies this intersection, a modest human innovation interacting with vast, unpredictable natural systems. Step by step, we see that even simple technologies can have profound consequences. Pottery is one of the first markers of organized, forward-looking human life. It reflects observation, experimentation, and social learning. Though its makers are long gone, their legacy endures in the quiet evidence of clay, in the patterns of human adaptation, and in the enduring interplay between people and the world they inhabit. The story of the first pottery is not just about survival. It is about the emergence of foresight, creativity, and connection across generations, a reminder that even the humblest objects can carry the weight of history.